Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yes, my name's Grecia Ramos. I'm currently a mental health therapist. I work at a nonprofit. I mostly work with the Latinx community, majority Spanish speaking. And so what brought me here today was actually one of my good friends, Brenda Perez, is doing a panel right now on gentrification and art. And so she had told me about it, and then she was able to connect me with Angela. So I'm very excited to be here today and just share any knowledge I have with you all.
Great. And what part of the city did you grow up in, or county?
Yes, I'm born and raised in Highland Park, Los Angeles.
Great.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Welcome aboard. Benjamin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Benyamin Chao. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. I work at the California Immigrant Policy Center. I'm a policy coordinator working on campaigns that improve the health and well-being of immigrants in California. And I was really happy to be invited because I myself, I was formerly undocumented. I was born in Brunei and I grew up in Long Beach, and for over 20 years, growing up in Long Beach, I wasn't documented until about 2 years ago. And so I'm just here to reflect with the other panelists on what it's like to kind of navigate, growing up in LA County with status, but also my observations on how immigrants have successfully, coped and succeeded and thrived.
Great. And what part of the city did you grow up in again?
I grew up in Long Beach.
Okay. Very good. Well, welcome aboard. So the goals of our session today is to educate attendees on how being undocumented affects a youth's self-identity, to educate attendees about how being undocumented impacts youth ability to succeed in school, and to educate on the different psychological effects on youth affected by undocumented status, and discuss resources that can help undocumented youth succeed as they move into adulthood. It's kind of hard for me to get that undocumented out because I rarely use that word when describing people. And so you can choose whatever adjectives that you feel most comfortable in describing the population, and that would be much appreciated. So we're going to get started. And so we have heard from who our panelists are, and we appreciate having young people really talk about it and talk about their experiences, not only their real experience and lived experiences, but experiences with other young people that they have worked with and their families and their communities. And as we all know, we're all one Los Angeles County, and so I'm really excited to hear from our young people today about their experiences. So the first question I'm going to toss out there, and how we're going to play it, is that either one of you can start off by just chiming in, and the other, if they have something to say or add to that, you can chime in as well, and we can have kind of like a dialogue instead of a panel of just questions. So we appreciate that. So how does, starting with what are the negative impacts that their parents, and undocumented status have on their lives? So the impacts of being undocumented or not having legal papers, what does that and how does that affect people in their day-to-day lives, young people?
I can go first.
Sure.
I think, it differs from family to family. I know, some families, the entire family is undocumented. Sometimes it's just the parents. There's a mixed status family. But I guess just speaking from my experiences, my whole family is undocumented. But it also was something that I didn't know growing up. It wasn't until I was about 16 years old, I was about to end my junior year of high school, that my mom had, sat me aside and disclosed to me what my status was. And it was interesting because it completely changed the way I saw myself and related to my peers. But it also, a lot of things that I had grown up experiencing started to make sense, especially, my mom being protective of me, making sure that I'm not telling people where I'm from, things like that. And it was because she didn't want people to suspect our immigration status, and that was, her survival strategy. And she told me, because when you take the SAT, or I was about to apply for college, there's this little box that asks you, like, what are you, a U.S. citizen? Are you a qualified immigrant? And I just felt torn because I was afraid that disclosing my status or my lack of status would affect my ability to pursue higher education. I think the toughest part about being, undocumented is just the fact that and this is before, our last president, during the Obama administration, there was a fear, a very real fear of being targeted, or just being policed. And that fear became real when my brother was arrested by ICE. ICE came to our home and detained him. And so just seeing how my brother was treated, visiting him at a detention center, it taught me, how, just the injustice that immigrants like myself face, but it also showed me that it doesn't have to be this way. And I think there are other folks who went through my experience who've been working to change that. But I'll leave
Let
it
me
there.
ask a question about did you ever have a conversation with your mom about your parents' decision to withhold the information until you were 16?
Yeah, we've talked about it. I think my mom felt a lot of, I have a single mom, and I think she made that choice. And I think she felt a little guilty about the situation. Like she felt some personal responsibility, but throughout my entire life, she's tried to adjust our status. And I wasn't able to adjust my own status until I got married as an adult. But I'm the only one in my family who was able to do that, and we've been here for 2 decades. So yeah, it's something that we go through as a family.
Tough challenge,
and, yeah. And even though I feel like I've left, I'm safe now. I still have my whole family to think about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Grecia?
Yes, thank you, Benjamin. Yes, so I myself am not undocumented. I'm a child of immigrants, so my parents came in the 80s. And, for my childhood, I didn't know they were undocumented, and fortunately they were able to become citizens, but I do currently still have friends and family that are undocumented. So I think it's just so complex, especially when it comes to whether your whole family's undocumented or that mixed status household, because yes, some of us feel safe, but we don't feel safe for the lives of our friends and family. So I think it's still very much like living in fear for someone else. I think that is also maybe my personal experience. I can't speak to myself. And that's just something that brings up, I'm thinking in terms of like mental health, right? Anxiety, hopelessness, which leads to depression. And so it's very much chronic. So it's very much in our daily lives, or something, that we saw with the last administration, which is the anti-immigration rhetoric. And that, of course, increased fear, anxiety, any other kind of negative emotions we can feel, because it's so constant, and you come with layers of trauma, with whether that's your family, whether that's yourself, plus this anti-immigration language or rhetoric, combined. That's just something that is difficult to deal with. So in terms of that, it's just just thinking about others, I think for me is more so the case, instead of thinking about myself. So there's, of course, this heightened anxiety.
And when you mention fear, how does that fear play out? Is it fear that one day you'll go visit a relative and part of that family is no longer there, or that they'll be placed in detention and then some family members can't visit them in detention? Is it that they will actually be deported to a place that maybe they have little familiarity with? How does the fear play out when you're sensing that?
For me, I'm thinking of a particular situation. My dad is a citizen. His aunt is his only family member here. And so even losing that connection, so that loss is a big thing that I have, because it's his only form of like social support here, like informal. So besides, his my mom and myself, but it's just a loss, a fear of loss for someone else to lose that social support. So I think for me that is more so the case, and just like planning our future. It's hard to plan your future out when you don't really know the outcome. So the unknown is just very scary. And just in general, yeah, the deportation. I did have an uncle that was deported, so it's also seeing my dad lose that social connection. So that, because that was like his brother. So
Yes.
the fear of loss for other people and grief. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And when you think about those losses and you think about young people and some of the fears that they experience, how does that affect a young person's self-identity as a person living here in America? Either one of you.
I can go. I have this story. In high school, we're required to take like a government class.
Yes.
And one of the exercises our teacher made us do was we took a mock citizenship test. And I just remember this experience so vividly because almost the entire class failed except me and this other immigrant student in the class. And I just remember feeling like, oh, wow, I wasn't born here, but I feel like I belong here. I make up I'm part of the fabric that makes up what America is. And then I found out I was undocumented and I felt a little bitter about that whole experience. But I think I think I've always felt torn because I feel like I was, I was 2 when I moved to Long Beach, California. And so, this is kind of the only reality I know. And so to imagine that I, may be forced to leave this country, I've always had challenges feeling like I belong somewhere. And I think, I didn't start thinking of myself, as an immigrant, as an identity until I reached college and I met other immigrants who like had similar experiences to me. And I felt, and I recognized that even though I don't have this status or that status, I can still create a place for me to belong. And I started to form my identity around that. And
is it connected to
where
your mom is from? Where's your family from?
Well, my mom's from the Philippines.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, that's also a source of strength for me, recognizing that, actually, the predominant narrative when it comes to immigration is, it's mostly from Central and South America. But there are a lot of immigrants from Asia and Africa as well. And particularly from the Philippines, there are a lot of undocumented immigrants from the Philippines. So just that, made me feel like, okay, I'm not alone, and finding, people who could relate helped me feel more stable with my identity. I felt like I didn't have to keep this secret anymore because I'm not the only one.
And do you see the young people that you're currently working with in your job, do they express any identity issues? And if so, what?
I'm not entirely sure personally. I think a lot of the people I work, there's some sampling bias, but a lot of people I work with, they really identify around the community organizing work that they do. A lot of the people are actively trying to change their situation. So I think for those people, it seems to help. But I think underneath all of that, there is sort of this shame, I think, just because of the stigma. And we're, as Grecia said, with our last president, all that harmful rhetoric, I think it's hard to watch the news and not feel like someone doesn't want you here. And so for me, there's a lot of work I had to do to actively undo that and be like, okay, I do belong here, even if someone else disagrees with me.
Right. And what does that do as far as young people's ability to form and sustain meaningful relationships and social connections?
Um, I'm wondering, Gracie, if in your work that's something that you touch upon, is how any youth who from immigrant backgrounds, this comes up in their personal relationships.
Yeah, I feel like I've noticed a lot of, for lack of a better word, like themes within my work. So definitely a lot of like just self-identity conflict in terms of, they're them being dreamers. So despite them having education and knowing the language, um, and almost being like their, the U.S. or U.S. born peers, there's still this something that tells them, like you were saying, that rhetoric maybe letting them know, like, oh, you're not really like us. And so I think there's definitely this conflict. Something I've seen too with both, the youth that I work that are undocumented or that their parents are undocumented is this really big need for perfectionism. So everything needs to be done right. There's no room for error. Um, they need to excel, and just like all eyes are on them. And so I think that's a big thing. And I see you nodding your head, so that's something also that I feel, because my parents are immigrants. I need to do everything, have a career. I need to work, and then I need to provide for them. So it's definitely like a lot of selflessness in those. In that trajectory, but yes, that very much need for perfectionism, and that can also lead to a lot of other things like anxiety and panic. Yeah,
Absolutely.
mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And when you think about that, that isolation, and then those feelings of achievement and underachievement and overachievement, and trying to live up to other folks' expectations. Like Benjamin said, there are some people who don't want us here at all. And how does like profiling play out in, not if it's not in your lives, but the people who you come in contact with or about in any arena of life, profiling folks who may have a different ethnicity or skin color or race or immigrant status, of course.
It's interesting, Gracie. I was nodding my head because I agree completely. Like when you're saying that, I was like, oh, I feel so seen right now, because that describes exactly like my upbringing and the pressure, that's put on the back of immigrant youths to kind of like, contribute to the family once, they establish their own career. I guess when it comes to how I was profiled growing up, I appear as like a brown Asian guy, so in high school and college, like I think there's always this assumption that like I would exceed, like there's this model minority stereotype but regardless of how I was actually performing, I think I didn't feel like I had the opportunity to reveal and be vulnerable, like, oh, I have all this other stuff going on that's making it hard. And I felt like I couldn't ask for help because I had to maintain this appearance. I mean, I think as I grew older, and people started to recognize me as like this brown, man, I've also noticed more racial profiling, to be honest. Depending on where I'm at in Southern California, I've noticed my friends being confronted. Like I was in Orange County, this guy was like, hey, this may be triggering to some folks, but he was like, hey, I'll buy you a plane ticket to go home to your home country. And I was like, whoa. And like, it made us angry. Or I've had like, I was walking, picking up a delivery for my work, and this cop on a motorcycle, police officer on a motorcycle pulled me up. Like he just stopped and just started questioning me. Like, why am I holding this package? Is it for me? I was just running an errand, So those experiences, I think, contribute to the vigilance, that immigrants have, and not feeling like we belong to our communities.
And because you're brown and Asian as well, do you find that the profiling for you is mostly based upon the fact that you're brown, or Asian when it comes to negative profile? I understand the model race piece, but when it comes to like a negative consequence of profiling?
I don't know. It also depends on where I'm at. Like in Long Beach,
Mhm.
there's a lot of Cambodians, so it's like it's kind of a normal thing to like see, you know, brown. I get mistaken for Cambodian a lot.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. And it also, I'm educated and I speak like kind of like in an educated, you know, like like properly, so that might mitigate like a lot of the negative stereotypes. But I think when it comes to interacting with like the government, I feel like my brown skin color is kind of like not worked in my favor, to be
Mhm. Sure.
honest. Yeah. But
Sure.
I hope that once people talk to me, they realize like, oh, they just see me as Ben, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Gracia, anything you want to add to that before we move on?
Just the piece of language in terms of
Mm-hmm.
profiling someone and then talking to them, and whether it's a police officer or someone else, talking to them and them not actually knowing the language or them having an accent, and so I think even then they start to have these assumptions or biases and then end up treating them in a negative way. Yeah, so I think just the language piece is important. Like we know a lot of Latinx community, the Asian community, and so we have a lot of elders who are still being profiled, and because of the language that they maybe didn't get to learn completely, or because of a lot of our family members have really strong accents still, and so even them just seeing them as less than because they can't speak English as well or as properly as they should.
That's a great point. I have some relatives and in-laws from El Salvador, and some of them came as children, and they learned English really, really quickly and had to become interpreters, like in many cases for the parents and other older folks in the family. And when going places in public in certain areas and having to speak on behalf of their parents, the entire family felt profiled and racially tarnished just based upon the fact that the child was doing most of the speaking on behalf of the parents. And so that brings up a lot of vulnerabilities for young folks when they take on that huge responsibility. First of all, like you mentioned earlier, about having to achieve and having to do things well because they are here because parents want better lives for them. So they have to live up to that. And then the fact that they're being profiled as well, does that make them more vulnerable for gangs, for substance abuse, for runaway, for other things, that risk factors that may hinder their ability to achieve here in America?
I can go. Yeah, so I think just any person who, and again, it's so complex and there's so many like intersectionalities, depending on individual's experience. But I think anyone who has experienced trauma or is chronically experiencing it, it's yeah, I think for me something I've noticed is like codependence, whether that's codependence on in relationships, um, like addictions, that can be substance use, that can be um, food, that can be even overworking. So that's something that I've noticed, and so I think sometimes those types of things come out as well. In terms of uh, gangs, I mean, there is a history in general of immigrants forming gangs, but it was more in terms of to fight, this racism or trying to keep in a group, and eventually, those gangs turned into something else that we know now. But from even my experience, like growing up in my neighborhood too, I had a lot of friends who were undocumented who were in gangs. Not to say that because they're undocumented, they're in gangs, but I think sometimes it does provide like a support. But it might be that even if they were not undocumented, maybe they would have ended up in these gangs anyway, because I think a lot of our immigrant communities end up residing in communities that already have this community violence or already have poverty or financial instability. So because our immigrant communities already come into these communities that already have all these factors, that can be something that leads a youth to that, whether or not they're undocumented.
I kind of want to echo what you said about poverty, Grecia, because if you think about someone who's undocumented, it's hard to find work. If you're undocumented, you're not authorized to work in the United States. So if you go through the whole job interview process, even if you have a college degree, you can get the offer, but once you're filling out the paperwork, they tell you, okay, we can't actually hire you legally. And so what are you left with? And I think that means there's fewer opportunities for immigrants, especially parents or immigrant youth. I mentioned earlier that my brother was detained by ICE. And part of the reason why he kind of, got into that pipeline with, into the carceral system, or he was incarcerated, is because, as a young person, he didn't have a work permit and he needed a way to make money. And so part of that was him, selling drugs and using as well. But after being freed and having the opportunity to start his own business, he owns 2 restaurants now. And so I say that to share that there's a lot of potential in the immigrant community, but because of these systematic barriers, like not having work permits or not being qualified for federal funding, for your education, a lot of people have to make other choices for survival. And also just kind of touching upon addiction, I myself suffered from addiction, and I've been sober for 7 months. And I think part of that was after I graduated from college, I didn't have my work permit, and I needed a way to cope. And I needed a way to, I was working under the table and I was feeling anxious all the time. But now that I have a stable job, I finally had the chance to address the root causes and find healthier ways to cope. So I think that's an important point you brought up, Grecia, as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. When you think about those psychological effects of being undocumented and discrimination and all those other things that play out, unfortunately, in our country, even in a progressive county like Los Angeles, when young people go out into the world, do they feel that they have to be more acculturated and give up their identity of their families, or is it that they're more wanting to fight the system?
I think it depends, of course. Maybe that's one of the themes is everyone's immigration story is different. Mm-hmm. But I would also say it can also change over time for someone. I grew up feeling like I really needed to assimilate. I really needed to fit in. I only grew up speaking English. My mom didn't teach me her language because she wanted me to speak English really well. But when I entered college, I was like, I need to find out who I am and I need to find out where I came from. And I started taking, fortunately, there was Filipino language classes offered at my school. So I started learning and I was able to rediscover, my roots. And so I think, yeah, it's a mixture of both. And I think it just depends on how people form relationships with people around them. Some people really find strength and connecting with their roots after immigrating. It sets us apart, and we also have really great food, things like that bring people together. But some people, maybe out of survival do need to fit in, and that's a reality for many folks. To get a job, maybe to get an education, we may be forced to modify some things about ourselves to get an advantage. But I'm hoping that that can change and people become more tolerant of where people come from, or even an accent. An accent is not a reflection of your intelligence. My mom speaks 3 languages. Go ahead.
She does what?
My mom speaks 3 languages, but she has an accent in English. But people on first hearing her may think she's not that smart. But most people don't know 3 languages, so that's really smart.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So young people, when they think about deportation, Is it more in the context of their older relatives or themselves that they have the most fear? I know from my experience in working with immigrant families and migrant families is the children feel somewhat secure and safe because they can go to school, which is a government funded program legally, and receive support in the schools, and they receive certain benefits also to help them, thrive in America. And their fear is mostly for the adults in their families, and that pressure on a young person also may cause some psychological and emotional issues as they grow up, always fearing for the folks who are there to protect them. And that may play out in school, it may play out in extracurricular activities, and it may play out in other portions of their lives. When you think about school, and again, I'm much older than the two of you, and I grew up in the Midwest, and so there were never any discussions about anyone's immigrant status back then, even though we were very mixed school. But in schools like in Los Angeles County, where it's more common to have migrants and immigrants, what's that experience like for young people when they know that they might be different from other students?
I spoke to a child behavior specialist who worked with the Long Beach Unified School District. And this was like right after Donald Trump was elected. She was telling me like she was shocked because she was working with like children who are kindergarten age, and they were crying at school. Like some children were distracted from their education because they understood on some level that their parents may be deported because the president wanted to deport their parents because they weren't born here. So yeah, I agree with what you said, Michael, about just being a risk factor, even for children who are U.S. citizens. 1 in 6 Californians have at least one parent who's undocumented. So it's an issue that affects us all, and even if it doesn't affect you directly, it may affect your classmate. But because there's that fear of, if this information is shared, someone may come after me, this paranoia, it becomes a secret. And I think when people keep secrets, it can become a point of shame, which affects someone's development, psychologically.
I'm going to see if you want to just comment on any of the consequences or risk factors that has occurred that you think play itself out around immigration before we move into some of the resources that might be available.
Yes, no, I just wanted to add, I work with like little ones too, like even 4 or 5-year-olds. And their parents started reporting to me during that time of when Trump was elected. Their tantrums increased, and their behaviors in school started escalating in terms of like even aggressive behaviors and crying. And these were kids that I was moving towards like closing their case because they were doing really well. And we ended up talking about, okay, like what's changing in the home. Their parents, just because their parents wanted to be informed too, would keep the news on. And so kids would be playing, but they would always have the news on to see if there were any updates out of fear for obviously their themselves. Wow. and their children. And so that was a big thing. It's just really, even sad. Even the little ones understood really what was the threat that was kind of compounded on their families. And so that was something that we saw a lot, or even like nervousness, jumpiness in little ones that we also saw in the teenagers, but definitely just the tantrums increasing. And so it can definitely lead to just like disruptions in school, or just seeing school as a safe place. But that was something that I wanted to add on.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's quite sad. As we think about, we have about 7 minutes to go, resources that may be available to these young people and their families. First of all, for education, for employment, for social support. Can you think of any good, tangible resources that might be available?
Yeah, I think, well, before I go into the government resources or the public resources available, I do want to say that if folks encounter anyone who's undocumented, or if folks are undocumented and kind of joining us on this panel, I think it's really important to find someone that you trust. If you're a student in school, a counselor, or a teacher, because it's very overwhelming to have to handle all of this, and they may be able to help guide you to resources and know what resources are there near you. But yeah, I can share some things that are available for folks in California and LA County. If you're undocumented people, students can get their get financial aid in California. I think that's a misconception I hear a lot. There's something called the California Dream Act, which allows people who graduate from high schools in California to get state financial aids, in-state tuition. And then due to the efforts of undocumented advocates, we have Medi-Cal healthcare for young immigrants, regardless of your status from age 0 to 26. And this includes mental health care. And this was in 2016, we had ages 0 to 16 expanded, and then 2019, ages 19 to 26. So I hope if folks don't have health insurance, they know they can get it. And then for all other ages, there's a program in there are programs in LA County that provide basic healthcare service at community health clinics, regardless of your status as well. It's called My Health LA. So yeah, and I think just know that people want to help you, and it's just hard to ask for help because there is that really real fear of sharing your status.
And I know that there's some discussions in migrant families and immigrant families about, well, we don't want to be a burden on society, and we don't want to use services because we do. They don't affect our application for documentation and for citizenship. And how can we help young folks understand that it's important for them to access these services because it does not affect their family's documentation process?
Yeah, well, I'll quickly respond to that. The policy that Trump put in place to kind of make it to put more risk if you use benefits, that's been reversed because we have a new president. That was one of the first actions he took. So I can say that, if there's a benefit that's available to you or an immigrant family, it will not affect your immigration status. That when you go to the county social services department, they will keep your data private. They're not going to share it with ICE or the federal government. And it's really just important to, get the help you need to be healthy. And I think that outweighs the costs or the risk of having to disclose your status.
Great. They put an evaluation in the chat room, so if folks want to start taking that, they can. And Garcia, if there's anything else that you want to add around resources or anything, that would be great. And we may have time for a question from one of our community members before we wrap up.
Yes, no, I just wanted to emphasize the Medi-Cal, and especially for mental health services, because so the nonprofit I work with, we see kids and families who have Medi-Cal. So yeah, that's really important. And definitely informal social supports, friends, families, just building community, I think is really important. I don't have any like concrete resources in my head, but just the Medi-Cal I wanted to emphasize, and also just utilizing your social supports, or reminding folks to use their social supports, because I think again there's really this want of or lack of want of asking for help, like you were mentioning. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm so proud of you young people. It's great that you all are products of Los Angeles County and the social networks and supports and family systems that you have to make you who you are today. And it's been such a pleasure hearing from you and your honesty.